Before this story begins, pause for just 3 seconds. If you believe the Titanic sank because of an iceberg, if you believe it was simply a tragic accident, then this story is going to disturb you. Because what really killed over 1,500 people that night was not ice. It was class. Before we begin, make sure you like this video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to this channel, because stories like this are not taught in school. Now, let me take you back to a night where money decided who lived and who was quietly sentenced to die. April 10th, 1912, Southampton, England. The Titanic did not leave the harbor as a ship. It left as a statement. From the moment she stood still at the dock, towering above human heads like a steel god, Titanic was never meant to be equal. She was designed to divide by class, by wealth, by power. The newspapers called her the unsinkable ship. The wealthy called her the safest place on earth. The poor called her a one-way ticket to hope. None of them knew she was a floating courtroom, and the verdict had already been written. The architecture of inequality. Titanic was not one ship. She was 3 ships stacked on top of each other. At the very top, first class, private promenades, heated swimming pool, Turkish baths, luxury dining rooms that looked like European palaces. Below them, second class, respectable, clean, controlled. Teachers, clerks, middle managers, people who followed rules and believed in fairness. And at the bottom, third class, steerage, immigrants, laborers, families who sold everything they owned to buy a single ticket to America. They slept near the engines, they shared bathrooms, they were surrounded by steel doors and long corridors. Those doors were installed for health inspection laws, but on April 14, 1912, they became prison gates. Who was on board? Titanic carried 2,224 souls. Among them, John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in America, Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's, Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to a fortune, and then a 19-year-old Irish girl traveling alone, Syrian families escaping poverty, Scandinavian farmers who had never seen the ocean before. Titanic did not value these lives equally, and when disaster struck, she proved it. April 14, 1912, 11:40 p.m. The iceberg did not tear the ship apart. It whispered, a soft, grinding scrape along the starboard side. In first class, the vibration felt like nothing more than a sudden stop. Champagne glasses barely shook. In third class, the sound echoed like thunder through metal corridors. Water began seeping in within minutes. But here is the first truth history softened. The officers knew the ship was doomed far earlier than most people were told. The damage reports were clear. The watertight compartments were flooding one by one. Titanic had less than 3 hours to live, and still no general alarm, no mass evacuation order, no explanation to the lower decks. Lifeboats, the mathematics of death. Titanic could legally carry 64 lifeboats. She carried 20. Why? Because too many lifeboats would clutter the decks and ruin the view for first-class passengers. Those 20 boats could save 1,178 people. There were 2,224 people on board. Someone had already decided that over 1,000 lives were expendable. Women and children first, the lie we tell ourselves. Yes, the rule existed, but how it was enforced depended on where you stood. In first class, men stepped back voluntarily. Officers explained the situation calmly. Families were guided to the deck. In third class, many never even heard the order. Language barriers caused confusion. Armed crew guarded stairways. Some third-class passengers were physically blocked from reaching the lifeboats, not by water, by people. Locked gates. This is where history becomes uncomfortable. Multiple survivor testimonies confirmed this. Steel gates separating third class from upper decks were closed. Official explanation, crowd control. Reality, control over who reached the boats first. By the time many gates were opened, the lifeboats were already gone. The Strauss decision. Isidor Strauss was offered a seat. He refused. "I will not get into a lifeboat before other men." His wife, Ida, stepped back out of the boat. "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." They were last seen sitting together on deck chairs as the water rose. This story became legend. But here's the darker truth. Their sacrifice was rare because they didn't need to make it. They were already offered salvation. Most people were never given the choice. The band played on. The musicians knew. They had been told the ship would sink, and still they played. Not for bravery, not for heroism. They played to keep panic down, to keep order. Music became anesthesia while the lower decks filled with freezing water. Temperature, the silent executioner. The Atlantic that night was 28 degrees Fahrenheit, -2 degrees Celsius. Human survival time in that water, 10 to 15 minutes. Over 1,500 people entered that ocean. Most did not drown. They froze, conscious, screaming, aware. The lifeboats could hear them. Few returned. Why? Because they feared being swamped by people desperate to live. Survival statistics that expose the truth. Let's remove emotion and look at numbers. First class, approximately 62% survived. Second class, approximately 41% survived. Third class, approximately 25% survived. Men versus women. Women first class, 97% survived. Women third class, less than 50%. Children. Third-class children died at higher rates than first-class men. This was not random. This was structured. Captain Edward John Smith, the man who never slowed down. Captain Smith was not careless. He was experienced. He was respected. And that is exactly what made him dangerous. This was meant to be his final voyage before retirement. The Titanic was not racing for a speed record, but she was maintaining near maximum speed through known ice fields. Why? Because slowing down would signal fear, and fear was bad for business. Smith received at least 6 iceberg warnings on April 14. Some were acknowledged, some were ignored, some never reached him. Not because of malfunction, but because first-class passengers were using the wireless system to send personal messages. Luxury over safety. The wireless room, when profit interrupted survival. Titanic's wireless operators were not Navy officers. They were employees of the Marconi Company. Their priority? Paid passenger messages. At 10:55 p.m., the nearby ship Californian sent a warning. "We are stopped and surrounded by ice." The message was received and dismissed. Why? Because the operator was busy transmitting messages for wealthy passengers. Minutes later, Titanic struck the iceberg. The ship that watched Titanic die. The Californian was less than 10 miles away. Its crew saw rockets in the sky. They did nothing. Why? Because the rockets were not the official color. Because the radio operator had gone to bed.
because protocol mattered more than human instinct. By the time help arrived, the Atlantic was silent. The inquiry that protected the powerful. After the disaster, 2 investigations were launched, one in the United States, one in Britain. They asked the wrong questions. They focused on iceberg visibility, technical failures, individual mistakes. They avoided class segregation, locked gates, corporate negligence. Why? Because blaming class meant blaming capitalism itself, and that was unacceptable. Third class, the forgotten dead. Many third-class victims were never properly identified. Families waited years for answers. Some never received bodies. Some never received compensation. Their names were misspelled. Their stories were erased. They were labeled as statistics, not people. The truth about lifeboats that returned empty. Several lifeboats were launched half full. Why? Fear of overcrowding, officers enforcing class order, lack of urgency. Some boats with room for 65 people left with 12. Those empty seats floated on the ocean while people froze nearby. Every man for himself, the reality we don't like to admit. Not everyone behaved heroically. Some men disguised themselves as women. Some bribed crew members. Some pushed others aside. Survival stripped away morality. But again, those closest to the lifeboats had the advantage, and proximity was determined by wealth. Titanic as a mirror of America. The ship did not invent inequality, it exposed it. The myth we still believe. We tell ourselves, if I were there, I would have survived. Statistics say otherwise. Your survival depended on your ticket, your cabin location, your access to information. Not courage, not goodness, class. The birth of the Titanic myth. In the years after 1912, the world did not want truth. It wanted comfort. Truth demanded accountability. Comfort demanded romance. So the story was reshaped. Newspapers focused on brave captains, gentlemen stepping aside, the band playing on. They avoided locked third-class gates, empty lifeboats, corporate negligence. Titanic became a moral fairy tale, not a systemic failure. Hollywood's greatest lie. When James Cameron's Titanic released in 1997, it did something extraordinary. It made people cry. And in doing so, it made people forget. The love story between Jack and Rose became the center. Class struggle became background scenery. The iceberg returned to being the villain. The system walked free. Millions left the theater believing it was tragic but unavoidable. That belief was the final victory of those who never wanted blame assigned. Why this version was safer? If Titanic was an accident, no one is responsible. If Titanic was class-based, then someone benefited, and benefit implies design. Design implies guilt. So the narrative softened. The survivors who spoke and were ignored. Not everyone accepted the myth. Some third-class survivors testified about confusing evacuation orders, locked passageways, language barriers ignored. Their voices were documented and then buried because their truth disrupted a very profitable story. Titanic didn't end in 1912. Titanic lives on because its structure lives on. Modern society still has priority access, paid safety, unequal exits, different ships, same blueprint. When disaster strikes, those closest to power leave first. the psychological comfort of blaming ice. Ice has no intent. Ice makes no decisions. Ice doesn't discriminate. That's why we prefer it as the villain. But systems do discriminate, and that makes us uncomfortable. What Titanic really teaches us? Not about bravery, not about love, but about who systems protect when they fail. Titanic asked one brutal question. When everything goes wrong, who is the system designed to save? The answer hasn't changed. The truth we avoid. If you were on the Titanic, your morality wouldn't save you. Your courage wouldn't save you. Your ticket might.
Survival was not the end. For many Titanic survivors, getting into a lifeboat was not salvation. It was the beginning of a life sentence. A sentence of memory. A sentence of guilt. A sentence of silence. The lifeboats were not quiet. From the lifeboats, survivors could hear the screams. Thousands of voices, men, women, children, crying for help, calling names, begging. And then, one by one, those voices stopped. Several survivors later testified that this sound haunted them more than the sinking itself, because they knew something unbearable. There was room. The empty seat that never leaves you. Some lifeboats left with less than half capacity. One woman later confessed she never slept a full night again. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the empty space beside her, a seat that could have saved a life. But no one told her to go back, and she did not ask. Survival did not feel like victory. It felt like theft. Charles Lightoller, the man who followed orders. Second Officer Charles Lightoller enforced women and children only more strictly than anyone else. He sent lifeboats away half empty rather than allow men aboard. He survived. For the rest of his life, he insisted he had done the right thing. But those who listened closely noticed something else. He never spoke about the screams. The silence of the rich survivors. Many wealthy survivors rebuilt their lives quietly. They donated to memorials. They avoided interviews. They rarely spoke publicly. Why? Because the questions were dangerous. Why were you saved? Why did your lifeboat leave early? Who stayed behind because you didn't? Silence was safer than truth. Children who grew old too fast. Some children survived the Titanic only to lose both parents that night. They were raised by relatives. They grew up famous without wanting to be. Every birthday reminded them of the night they were spared while their parents were not. Survival shaped their identity, but never healed it. Survivor's guilt, a term not yet invented. In 1912, there was no name for survivor's guilt. There was only shame. Many survivors avoided reunions. Some refused to board ships ever again. Others drank. Some died young, not from injury, but from what they carried inside. Why so few spoke out? Speaking meant challenging the official story, and the official story was clear. Everyone did their best, but survivors knew that wasn't true. Some crew hesitated, some officers misjudged, some passengers were prioritized. To speak was to accuse, and accusation threatened reputations, companies, nations. So most chose silence. Memory as a burden. Anniversaries were the worst. Every April 15th, the ocean remembered, and so did they. They remembered the cold, the screams, the lifeboats drifting away. Memory became a private punishment. Survival was unequal even afterwards. First-class survivors often received financial stability, public sympathy, privacy. Third-class survivors often received nothing, no compensation, no platform. Even in survival, class followed them ashore. The unspoken question. Every survivor carried the same unanswerable question. Why me? There was no good answer. Only luck, only position, only timing. And none of those Field deserved.
Titanic did not end at the ocean floor. On April 15, 1912, at 2:20 a.m., the Titanic disappeared beneath the Atlantic. But the system that built her, the priorities that shaped her, the values that governed her, never sank. They survived. They evolved. They learned how to look normal. The illusion of progress. After the Titanic, the world said, never again. More lifeboats, better radios, new regulations. But regulations only fix mechanics. They do not fix hierarchy. They do not fix power. They do not fix who gets warned first, who gets evacuated first, and who is told to wait. Modern disasters, same blueprint. Different decade, different technology, same outcome. When buildings burn, those with access leave first. When storms hit, those with money escape. When systems collapse, those at the bottom are told to be patient, to trust, to wait, just like third class waited while the lifeboats filled above them. Everyone is equal until something goes wrong. In calm times, society pretends equality exists, but disaster reveals design. Titanic revealed who had information, who had access, who had authority, and who did not. That truth still holds. Why we still tell the iceberg story. Because it protects us. If the iceberg was the villain, then no one is responsible. Not the builders, not the owners, not the system. Ice cannot be punished. Ice cannot be reformed. Systems can. That is why we avoid that truth. Titanic as a warning we ignored. Titanic warned us about profit over safety, comfort over caution, image over preparation. We applauded the warning, then rebuilt the same priorities with better marketing. The question that refuses to sink. Every generation inherits the Titanic question. When everything fails, who does the system save first? If your answer depends on wealth, status, proximity to power, then the Titanic is still sailing. You are on the ship too. This is the part history books never say. You are not just learning about the Titanic. You are standing on its deck. You are part of a system that promises safety until it doesn't. And when that moment comes, the exits will not be equal. The final truth. The Titanic did not fail because of ice. It failed because it was designed to protect some lives more than others. And when disaster came, it did exactly what it was built to do. If this story changed how you see history, like this video. If it made you uncomfortable, comment below. That discomfort matters. And subscribe to the channel, because history doesn't just tell us what happened. It warns us about what's happening again.